Today's episode is absolutely a second round of Sonic characters if they were dragons, following the first episode of it that I made a few weeks ago, but it's also gonna have some other things too. Stuff that, honestly, if I elaborated on it more now, that would just end up spoiling the story that you're about to watch, so let's just get into the story, shall we? No need to draw out the intro, let's go! Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show. This week has been quite strange for me. Since becoming an overseer charged with watching over my world around 1 year ago, I've had many strange weeks, but this one was particularly odd. You see, someone opened a portal to my world using peculiar means. My abilities as an overseer allowed me to sense this portal had opened, and when I arrived at the location of the portal's opening, I found that it had been opened using technology far more advanced than anything I believed could possibly be native to my world. The machine, holding open a glowing yellow portal, was nearly 30 feet tall, and all around it were massive footsteps that more so resembled a massive human than any creature I knew to be native to the region I was in. I was about to look through the portal when a foul smell floated through the air and prompted me to hide behind the machine. A shambling slime drake was marching by in the distance, and I had no interest in interacting with one of those creatures. Unfortunately, by the time it was far enough away, the portal suddenly closed, leaving a lifeless machine before me. I barely started to think about what to do next when a gust of hot wind swirled around me. I whipped around and my hand shot to the hilt of my blade as a purple tiger-like dragon landed down beside me, seeming to snarl at the machine. I remained very still, ready to strike if needed, but not wanting to startle the creature. I didn't remotely recognize it, which was odd, as the area we were in I'd extensively explored in the past. The dragon had a very elegant and near-royal presence, even with a constant blaze of flames spilling from its mouth and occasionally sputtering out of its paws. It held its head high and proper and looked down its snout at the machine disapprovingly before turning to me. It seemed as curious about what I was thinking as I was of it. A sudden jolt of intuition shot through me, and before I could even think of whether it was the right thing to do, I bowed to the creature. It gave an approving nod to me, then leaned its head up and sniffed the air. It sneered, glancing back in the direction of the shambling drake, but then turned its head and sniffed again, then took a few steps northward. Whatever it was seeking, it clearly had caught the scent of, but before taking off, it turned back to the machine, and then to me. It then leaned its wing down towards me, as if offering for me to climb up onto its back. I immediately got a sense that it would be rude to refuse, but more so than that, I was incredibly curious to see what this creature did next, and if it was seeking the creator of this machine. I carefully climbed up onto its back, and we shot off into the air. The speed we were flying was remarkable. I'd only a month prior studied the sonic soaring wyverns of the Angel Island and had been impressed by their speed, but this dragon, which I'd named the Blazing Philidgon, may have been matching it. As we flew, in the mountains and forests around us, I thought a few times I saw a streak of light shoot by in the distance. It caught my peripheral vision, but on each occasion it went by the time I looked over to it, it was gone. I thought I may have simply been seeing things, but regardless was more focused on where this creature was taking me. We approached a volcanic mountain range surrounded by mushroom groves. Then, my jaw nearly dropped off my face as we soared over another set of mountains to see that hidden in the rocky landscape were what I can only describe as the skeletal remains of two titanic mechanical beings. I thought that was what we might have been there for, but the dragon just flew past them to a nearby crevice. Inside of that was a sort of base camp full of partially built machines, cages, and chained up dragons. There was a sonic soaring wyvern and a tail-twirling prowler, both native to the Angel Island I'd visited a month prior, and a third silver, gold, and teal dragon that I didn't recognize, but my mount seemed to. As soon as the Blazing Philidgon saw this dragon, it shot straight down into the canyon, landing right before it. I leapt off its back and looked around as it chomped at the creature's chains. The way the silver dragon was bound, looked far too familiar, and the kinds of dragons we were seeing here immediately gave me an idea of who was responsible for this place. I just couldn't understand how he'd done it. He hadn't even been off the Angel Island for a month. Unfortunately, the man I suspected was soon able to explain. One of the machines nearby whirred to life, and from it shot a barrage of bonds and chains that clamped around the blazing dragon's maw, legs, and wings. The dragon lashed out its tail and struck the chains of another nearby dragon, but soon too its tail was bound. The blazing dragon was pulled to the machine and held tightly in place. It thrashed and struggled, but it was no use. I drew my rapier, and a cascade of golden glowing blades emerged from my back, a relatively new ability of mine that I referred to as the Blade Cascade. I looked around, ready to strike, until the figure finally revealed himself, a rotund man wielding a blacksmith's hammer and toting what I still fully had to admit was a glorious mustache, Sir Roberto Nick. Sir Nick thanked me mischievously for bringing him another test subject. I ignored him and asked how he'd built all this, both in regards to how he'd found sufficient machinery and tools in my world, and how he'd made it all so quickly. Last I'd spoken to him was on the Angel Island, where he'd been enacting experiments and searching for a set of 7 powerful emeralds, and he'd claimed to have lived on that island for decades. He gave a cryptic answer, saying that for the last year he had been there, but he'd also been here. He said that conveniently the mechanical beings we'd seen on our approach through these mountains had just been laying around destroyed and rusting, and had provided plenty of parts with which to build all I saw around me. Using these machines, he was attempting to harness the power of various artifacts and the captured dragons I saw before me. He claimed the silver one could even travel through time and was from the distant future. I supposed it was possible, but I still doubted this man's sanity and knew he very well could have been mistaken. His experiments had of course hit a hitch when one of his test subjects that I'd seen on the Angel Island, the soaring Shadow Wyvern, had made off with 3 of the 7 mystical crystals he'd spent his life on the island seeking. And of course it complicated things further when that same dragon hurled him off the island into the ocean. But that had apparently just prompted him to come here. Once again, I demanded to know how he'd built all this so quickly. Technology like what I was seeing around us was still relatively new to me, but I did know from time I'd spent in more technologically advanced dimensions that the machines around us would have taken Sir Nick months, if not years, to build on his own. He once again responded cryptically, saying that he was on his own, but he wasn't alone. That he had built all this, but he also hadn't. I was about to give up and simply free the dragons around me to let them have at him when my entire body suddenly seized up. A burning jolt shot through my spine and the rest of my body. I dropped to the ground twitching, my blade cascade flickered away, and a barrage of bonds shot at me. They latched over my forearms and pulled me into the wall. I couldn't move, save for the twitching that slowly faded, and as it did, I looked at Sir Roberto Nick angrily, then at Sir Roberto Nick again. I thought the shock I'd received was making me see double, but soon I realized there were truly 2 of him. The 2 versions of this same man laughed maniacally in unison, seeming very proud of how confused I was. I quickly noticed that while Sir Roberto Nick was adorned in attire that seemed native to my world, this other him was wearing clothes more like that I'd seen in technologically advanced worlds. He clearly wasn't from around here. I could have put some of the pieces together myself, but I wouldn't need to, as this other Sir Nick seemed very eager to elaborate further on who he was and what his plans were. This was actually ideal for me, as I'd noticed something going on behind them both that I needed to keep them distracted from seeing as long as I could. This other man said his name was not Sir Roberto Nick, but Dr. Ivo Robotnik, and that he was from a world where heroes had locked him away because of his machines and his overwhelming genius. His words, not mine. Soon after, he'd fled imprisonment and transported himself across the multiverse with a device he'd built, planning to only return to his world when he'd made something to defeat those same heroes that had locked him away. He sought various power sources that could enhance his machines, even stealing a set of gems called the Soul Emeralds from the blazing dragon behind me, who I just learned then wasn't even from my dimension. After leaping around the multiverse for a year, he'd eventually found himself in my world, where he found the destroyed mechanical men hidden in the mountains. They were like a gold mine of advanced materials to work with that he couldn't pass up. He spent much of his time alone, building, but would occasionally go into the nearest towns for food and other supplies. There he came across a barbarian woman, adorned in green armor that granted her extra abilities thanks to shards of an emerald forged into her suit. She said that she'd stolen the gem from a mysterious island. Not only would Robotnik press her for more information about this island, but he'd eventually steal the armor from her to use the emerald's power for himself. He then sought out the Angel Island, and there was shocked to see that many of the species of dragons residing on it heavily resembled the very heroes that had locked him away in his world. More surprisingly still was when he met Sir Roberto Nick, a man who was very clearly a version of him native to my world. They both had their own goals and work to do, but obviously their ideals and lust for power aligned, so Ivo gave Sir Nick a communications device and built him a small flying machine so they could converse and occasionally meet, and scheme together as to how they could each become the most powerful beings in their respective universes. With that said, Ivo seemed about ready to cease his rant and turn away from me, but I needed to keep him talking, so I asked about the portal I'd found, what he'd used it for and why he built it so far away. He eagerly continued, saying he'd sent through a few machines to his own universe, including one powered by the broken emerald he'd stolen from the barbarian woman. He wanted to test out the heroes from his world to see if they'd gotten any more powerful in the last few years. He'd built the portal a ways away in case any of those heroes came through themselves, then they wouldn't be able to immediately find him or his base or his other machines. With a maniacal laugh, he was about to turn away once again, so I asked the only next thing I could think of. He'd mentioned some soul emeralds that he'd stolen from the blazing dragon in its universe. I asked what he'd used those for. Unfortunately, with a laugh, he said he supposed he could give me a look, then promptly turned around. But as he did, he saw that the sonic soaring wyvern behind him was just about to free itself of its final bonds. The blazing Philidon's final slash of its tail before being chained up had loosed the bonds on the wyvern's claw, and it had been quietly carving away at its other chains. Ivo and Sir Nick both ran for something just as the sonic wyvern loosed its last chain and whipped its tail, slamming Sir Nick across the base. Unfortunately, Ivo had ducked under the swipe and dove for a remote. He slammed a button on it and a large sliding steel door in the earth suddenly peeled open. The sonic dragon ignored it and shot its jaw down towards Ivo, but before it could snatch its prey, from the depths beneath shot up a mechanical beast that hammered its head against the sonic dragon, then chomped into its neck and slammed it into the ground. It then blasted up into the air above and let out a mechanical shriek. Ivo sneered, saying, "I suppose now is as good a time as any to test run Metal Sonic 2.0. It opened its maw and a red swirl of energy built up. It seemed about ready to fire upon the downed dragon below when a bolt of blue lightning suddenly zipped into the canyon. The streak of blue fired through the base, and I instantly knew it was the same light I'd seen zipping around the mountains on our way here. It slammed into Ivo, hurling him across the canyon, instantly knocking him unconscious. The figure was a blue-clad hero who gave an excited look to the recovering dragon next to him that struck an uncanny resemblance to his own attire. His eyes then shot up to the dragon above, who was still charging up a blast aimed at the sonic wyvern. The hero bolted off again, running up the canyon wall and hurling himself right at the dragon's head. He tucked his body into a ball, then slammed right against it in a spark of blue and red. The dragon's head was thrust aside and it misfired, shooting a hole in the canyon wall with its crimson blast. The blue blur landed just as the Sonic Wyvern had recovered and was soaring up off the ground. It too flew straight at the metal dragon, curled its own body into a ball, then slammed into the mechanical menace. The Sonic Wyvern then backed up and spat a blue beam of lightning from its maw. Sparks ignited all around the metal beast, but it clearly had no effect. The metal dragon lunged its maw forth, but once again, the blue blur shot off the ground and slammed against the beast's head, shattering some of its teeth. But the foe swirled its body and swung its tail up, smacking the blue hero straight up into the air. He spiraled around, unable to get his bearings. His ascent slowed, and he soon started shooting towards the earth. The metal dragon charged up another blast, aimed right at the helpless hero, but then the Sonic Dragon shot forth and drove the jagged end of its tail right into the chest of the metal fiend. It shrieked furiously, turned its aim, and fired its crimson blast straight through the chest of the Sonic Wyvern. It flopped through the air, eyes fluttering, but just managed to glide itself under the falling hero. He slammed onto the dragon's back, then flopped off, hitting the ground hard, but quickly getting up to see the poor dragon slam to the earth in a lifeless husk. The blue hero's teeth clenched as he looked back up at the metal beast, but more specifically at the hole that was now punctured in its chest. He sprinted up the wall once again and blasted right at the dragon. He flew past its snapping jaw and grabbed onto its chest, then climbing right into the open wound. After a moment, light started to spark from within the creature and it lurched through the air. It began snapping its own jaw and claws and tail at its body. It was being battered from within and out, and soon the creature's head lunged back and popped right off its neck, with the hero bursting out and skidding to the ground, holding a set of 7 emeralds. The creature crashed to the ground in a heap of lifeless metal. Soon after, the hero, who oddly enough referred to himself as Sonic, freed me and the other dragons, even returning the 7 soul emeralds that had powered Ivo's creation to the blazing Philidgon. He told me his tech-savvy sidekick had closed but then reopened the portal for him to come through and look for Ivo in this world, but that he certainly hadn't expected all of this, especially to see a dragon bearing such a likeness to himself and other dragons bearing resemblances to beings he knew from his own world. We both, of course, mourned the death of the brave wyvern. But after I told him that there were many more like it on the Angel Island, Sonic quickly came around to an idea I suggested, that as a way to honor its life and bravery, since the creature was dead anyhow, I may know someone who could turn its hide into a set of armor for each of us. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this episode of Sonic Into the Hedgehog-averse, which, by the way, is the name of a playlist that I've made for including all of the Sonic-related episodes that kind of melded into this story. But of course, the 2 most important ones are the first episode of Sonic characters as dragons, and the first full episode of Sonic characters as superheroes. If you're new here, you might want to check out either of those, or that whole playlist. By the way, there will be posters of the dragons from this episode up on my Teespring store, as usual, like with pretty much all my dragon episodes. I'll link them in the pinned comment, or the description, or one of those places. You'll see them below this video somewhere. And of course, give me other ideas for what you'd like to see me do with Sonic characters, or what things turned into dragons, but I definitely think there's gonna be more Sonic stuff coming on this channel. Doing armors of them could be fun, more superheroes, we'll see what happens. But always open to suggestions. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or uplifting note, and the thought I want to leave people with today is a quote by Mary Engelbright, which says, if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change the way you think about it. Love a good simple one that speaks for itself. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Monday.